plea and did not address the court.
Finally, nearly 9 in 10 parents are shopping around for bargains as their kids go back to school. Research was carried out by Currys and found more than half will spend at least €500 before schools reopen. 60% of those surveyed will buy a laptop for their child online rather than in store. It's 7:02.
News Talk weather.
Thanks to Ryanair. Time for golf in Portugal, Spain, Italy and Scotland this autumn.
Scattered outbreaks of rain will continue to spread overnight, turning heavy in places, becoming drier and clearer throughout the night with some mist or hill fog, lows of 8 to 13 degrees. Now you're up to date on News Talk.
The Newsround on Off the Ball.
With Gillette for an effortless finish to your day. New Gillette Labs Razor with exfoliating bar.
This is News Talk.
Tuesday's edition of Off the Ball, plenty for us to discuss between now and 10 o'clock. Carl Denny's going to be along with us, looking back at what was a pretty decent European Championships for Team Ireland. They concluded with a bronze medal for Mark English in the 800 metres on Sunday after a battle between Laura Moore and Ciara McGeehan, where McGeehan eventually took silver in the 1500 metres in a thrilling race on Friday night. We'll be looking back at what was a pretty decent Red Monday in the end between Manchester United and Liverpool. United winning by 2-1. We'll be talking about that with Miguel Delaney and also Ireland legend Kevin Kilbane on the Football Show. And Fiona Hayes joins us to look back on what was a pretty comprehensive victory for the Irish women's rugby team against Japan. The new generation coming through and putting 50 points up on a team who are going to the World Cup at the weekend. Delighted to say Ronan is alongside me. How are you this evening, Ronan Mullen?
All good, Will, all good.
Yeah, you look back on Red Monday. I think back to, was it now 7 years ago from the original edition of Red Monday when Zlatan made his debut and it didn't go quite well. I can hear Richie McCormack already saying, don't say it. They said it multiple times last night, Richie McCormack, who's hiding along in the background as well. They did mention it multiple times last night, and I thought, Richie, to be honest, they weren't going to call it Red Monday because they wouldn't want to remind us of that game at Anfield.
Red Monday sounds like a 70s terrorist attack that happened on the continent somewhere, and it should remain as such. It's just dreadful branding for what is essentially just a game of football.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of hype last night, Rich. It was, 90 minutes of build-up before the game. They went 6:30 as opposed to 7 o'clock for Monday Night Football. And look, I thought the game was reasonably entertaining. I mean, Liverpool were terrible by their own lofty standards, and Manchester United were a massive improvement in what they've been the last few weeks.
Yeah, firstly, on the 90 minutes of build-up, every game, any game, just needs 5 minutes. Go back to the old ITV standard of you join Elton Wellesby and, Brian Clough in a box, side of pitch, teams are out, boom, there you go. But on the game itself, it's really remarkable to think that that's the same Manchester United team, save 2 changes, who played against Brentford and started against Brentford the week before. Setting aside how bad Liverpool were, and they have been bad so far this season, just the sheer upping in levels, in intensity, in willing to take on a man to actually, force the play on Manchester United's behalf was superb last night. It really was. The crowd got behind them in a way that I don't think anybody really anticipated, especially with talk of protests, etc., etc. And yeah, the players like Jadon Sancho and Marcus Rashford, don't want to say reborn, but it's nice to see shoots of something positive from players who a lot has been expected of them over the last 2, 3, 4 years, and they haven't really delivered. So yeah, from a Manchester United perspective, fantastic. From a Liverpool perspective, very, because they have been dogged by injuries, but even with that, the players that did start last night are central to how they play, i.e. Andy Robertson and especially Trent Alexander-Arnold. And certain teams, and it goes back to the Champions League final and maybe before that, look to have figured out how to play against them. And if you give them a chance to play against them and get in behind and actually test the defensive mettle, particularly of Trent Alexander-Arnold, you're going to, enter him into a world of pain. Yeah. And United did that several occasions last night and reaped the benefits.
Ronan, it didn't have to be the Real Madrid model from the Champions League final that Manchester United used. This was the Fulham model from the first game of the season.
Is it an offensive thing to say that it was...
Yes, anything that follows those words, it's going to be yes. Go on.
Is it an offensive thing to say that it was Solskjaer-esque performance from Manchester United? I know there's little intricacies in...
It's because they defended deep, they're on the counter-attack. Make the argument there.
Yeah, I know. This is one of the ones I'm asking for trouble on the internet here, but there was obviously keynote moments where they pressed in a coordinated fashion, which was probably never present under the Solskjaer reign, but that potent counter-attacking display where they sat deep and broke was on show yesterday. And Jamie Carragher made the point that he watches Liverpool week in, week out, obviously, and they insist on this high line. defenders of top ilk would see that space in behind and think, geez, I should probably drop, when you see like forwards of the pace of the likes of Marcus Rashford, for example. But it's drilled into them, don't drop. But any game plan which sees an opposition player streaking in on your goal every single week can't be a good one, because we saw what Wilfried Zaha did last week. I was at the Fulham game, same thing. Fulham could have hammered them that day if they took their chances, and United were in on counter openings as well yesterday. So I understand the principles, but Ten Hag, on the flip side, had to forego some of his principles, shall we say, from the Brentford game, where that insistence of playing out from the back was shelved.
They didn't play from the back at all.
No,
so graphically they went up an hour in. De Gea had played not one short pass at that point. Yeah,
and Richie makes a good point on the changes in personnel weren't plentiful, but they were significant, and obviously who was omitted. And you look at the back four that played against Liverpool last year, the 5-0 defeat. It was a totally different back four last night, and I think that's significant, because can we say the Harry Maguire era is over? Are they ready to nip the bud on that £80 million signing and think, is he...
The first step is to leave him out.
Yeah. But
test the waters.
I would say that as much as the humiliation in Brentford was cataclysmic in many ways, it gave Ten Hag a firm platform to make these bold decisions. I think the Ronaldo one, not to come on Ronaldo's side in any way here, but like, he's not match fit, and I don't think Ten Hag ever foresaw that he'd be in the team were it not for Anthony Martial's injury. He probably wouldn't have featured from the start yet. So that was an easier one in practical sense, but the Maguire one has been coming for a long time. Like, it's not even a form issue with him, it's just to play a progressive brand of football at the top end of the modern game with someone who lacks pace like that. I think it's just too tricky.
Richie, when it comes to Maguire, it's different to Ronaldo too, because Ronaldo can come in, have cameo performances like last night. They can rotate the front three at different times. You drop your captain and your first choice centre back. This indicates a change in approach from Ten Hag from here.
Yeah, and there was a nicely veiled dig in Ten Hag's post-match interview on Sky last night. I was watching. It kind of got overshadowed by his little slip of an F-bomb in there. But he mentioned just in passing that your forward players can't just be conserving energy waiting for their offensive moves, I think was the term used, to transpire. That they have to be, as John Giles has said several times about Liverpool, oddly enough, on this show, they have to be all go, go, go. And like that, I don't think it was too hard to read between the lines and see that he mentioned, like, you're talking about a fairly immobile 37-year-old when you talk about that. And they did become more susceptible to a counter-attack as soon as Ronaldo came on the pitch last night. And I think that's why they had a pretty hairy last few minutes at Old Trafford last night. It's hard to see how he continues on at the club. I don't think there's space from there. I don't think there's room from there. He in no way fits what Ten Hag is probably trying to set about at the club. And it would serve everybody well if he could find somewhere happy enough to pay his wages. Unfortunately, his wages are so exorbitant that there's no getting rid of him. And they might well be stuck with him until next season. But certainly, to Ronan's point, he's not going to be a regular starter. And nor should he be, because the way United's want to go about a game under Ten Hag, attacking the opposition in their own half, Ronaldo's not the man to do that.
Like, I made the Solskjaer point somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but like, he was lambasted for being a vibes man, Solskjaer, that it's all about, you know, building up a good spirit and let the lads go out and do whatever they want, and that's dismissed in so many quarters in modern football journalism. It's all about the X's and O's, and Ten Hag pointedly was essentially explaining that tactics are irrelevant if you don't get to the pitch of the performance on a human level. And that's like, if Brentford want to beat you more, they're going to win the game. I think he was saying this to Neville and Carragher in the sit-down they had pre-match. So that's man from heaven for Roy Keane, who's like, it's all about the spirit, and the likes of Graham Souness, whose opinions on that matter are somewhat dismissed. But these are lads who compete at the very top end of the game. They know if you're not clued in.
On huge elements of that though as well, Ronan. If you consider, right, we're talking about how little they ran against Brentford, and we're talking about the fact they were outrun by 13 kilometres, I think, by Brentford during the game, and that was symbolically what the players had to run on Sunday morning when they came in for their recovery session. But even last night, you had particularly Lisandro Martinez early on in the game snapping into a tackle very early on to kind of set the tone.
Totally. And
you had Rashford playing with an amount of freedom and abandon and taking on defenders, which he hadn't been doing recently.
Yeah, and Malacia as well. Like, there's something to be said for getting the fans on side in a game where you're coming off the back of a wretched defeat and United had to start fast, and to your point, Martinez snapping into that tackle, and Malacia, I think as much as we're talking about Maguire, I think Shaw symbolises in many ways the drift or whatever, like his career, the lack of progression, save for one good season under Solskjaer, he's kind of never really kicked on, whereas Malacia is sprinting back into position and just showing a palpable eagerness throughout is an easy way to get the fans on side and keep that sort of tempo up. So they might have stumbled upon a system, or maybe Ten Hag was giving them enough of he gave the old way maybe enough of a chance to prove it's not going to work anymore, and that's given them the platform, as I said, to build from.
Conversely, those two defeats may well have helped in the longer term. Michael and Finlayson, contact him 53106. You can always text the show on that number or send us a message at Off The Ball on Twitter as well. Whatever about Trent Alexander-Arnold, what is Klopp seeing in Firmino? His contribution is absolutely zero. Wasn't helped, Richie, by the fact that Liverpool had no platform in midfield either last night, but Firmino in a way probably made it easy for the two United centre-backs, because he was always trying to receive the ball with his back to goal, and you take Sadio Mane out of the team, it takes away those diagonal dangerous runs going the other way, and in a way, as well as United defended, Liverpool made it a little bit easier for them than normal as well.
Yeah, they were pretty toothless for the majority of the game, and the team that has Mo Salah and Luis Diaz, and on form on his day, Roberto Firmino shouldn't be toothless. It's gas the way in these couple of seasons that injuries have struck Liverpool, particularly a couple of years ago in their championship defence, when defence was an issue, and suddenly realised, oh God, maybe we should have signed some centre halves in the summer. Like when you're starting Jordan Henderson and James Milner at Old Trafford on the third night of the Premier League, like maybe you should have signed some midfielders in the summer. Now I know they said they felt they didn't need any, and there are injuries that you have to mitigate in there too, to Thiago for one, but you can't help but look at that midfield area for Liverpool and think that it needed refreshing, even with the players that you have there. Like with Thiago, he's like constantly injured. James Milner is the wrong side of 35, and Jordan Henderson's not getting any younger either, and played sparingly last season as well as a result of that. So
the argument's there, Richie, like even when Gini Wijnaldum left and things didn't work out well for him last year at PSG, but they could have done with an extra body coming into midfield. Okay, Harvey Elliott is emerging, but Naby Keita misses so many games. Fabinho wasn't 100% fit at the start of this year, and that seemed to be the feeling why they brought him on last night, was because he wasn't 100% to start. They needed bodies in midfield. I think Liverpool fans have been crying out for this for over a year now.
They do, and I've a lot of respect for Harvey Elliott. I think there's a decent player in there. I don't think he's going to reach the level that many might have presumed he would have done when he was a youngster at Fulham at 16. I think there's been a levelling off to a degree after that leg break, and that's understandable, to be fair. That can happen to a player. They did need to go out and buy. There's still time, they're not going to, but they did need to go out and buy another midfielder. The Jude Bellingham thing isn't going to happen this summer. He was probably the ideal candidate for somebody that could have been thrown into that midfield, and Borussia Dortmund just aren't going to do business on him this summer. But they need him or someone like him, or multiples of someone like him, come this time next year, because it could be a pretty ugly season for them if the midfield continues to malfunction like it did last night.
Ronan, we'll talk to Miguel and to Kevin a lot more detail about it later, but is there concern now about Liverpool? 7 points dropped so far. It's been a very slow start to the season. Whatever about the United game, where that's a rivalry meeting, they would have been expected to pick up full points. Fulham away, Crystal Palace at home, and if they're going to be title contenders, there's not much room for error now.
Yeah, I think it'll probably balance out as the season progresses. There's probably enough quality at the top end of the pitch when Nunez, number one, can keep his head both literally and figuratively, and find his feet in the Premier League. I think he'll contribute in a big way, and they might need to recalibrate their approach a little bit, where midfield was such literally the engine room for the initial swathes of Klopp's tenure. They've proactively, by signing Thiago, and a more tactical player, and making him the fulcrum in there, they've gone away from that all systems go, all action midfield approach. And to your point, the age profile of some of the other players and lack of mobility therein, they can't be running teams off the park in the way they used to. So there will be a few changes in that regard. The Jude Bellingham one is interesting. Like if you're briefed by the right people, they would suggest they've gone a long way along with that deal for next summer, and seems to fit the profile perfectly for Liverpool. But that's presumably reliant on Champions League football. I'm not saying that's in doubt for Liverpool yet, but if this form continues for any length of time, they're going to find themselves in a little bit of a tricky position, because Arsenal have started like a house on fire there, and we know what Spurs and Chelsea are capable of, and I'm definitely not putting Man United in that mix yet, but there are doubts there that weren't there, say, after the Community Shield, for example. I think Liverpool fans would have been feeling a lot better about things after that, and the tide has somewhat turned in the last month or so, which might be arrested if they do a little bit of business towards the end of this transfer window. The only thing is, you've seen with Klopp previously, if it's not the right player, he's not going to sign somebody just for the sake of it. So if it is a case of holding out for Bellingham next summer, he might be more inclined to do that.
There you go, folks. Liverpool in crisis. You heard it first there from Ronan Mullen. The news round is brought to you with Gillette Labs for an effortless finish to your day. Where do you want to start tonight, Rich?
We'll start out west. Kevin McStay says he will leave no stone unturned in trying to make Mayo competitive. He was appointed as James Horan's successor last night on a 4-year term. McStay's backroom teams comprise of former Mayo manager Stephen Rochford, Donny Buckley, Belmullet manager Damien Mulligan and Liam McHale. Speaking to Midwest Radio after last night's county board meeting, the Mayo GAA chair Seamus Toohey said he was glad that the lengthy process of appointing a successor to Horan was finally at an end.
I'm relieved to be at this stage. It was a difficult few weeks, to push this forward. But look, I think it was an excellent process, and I'm delighted to be where we are tonight. I think the process, we appointed the best person for the job at this particular time. Kevin brought a very impressive team with them. Indeed, all 4 candidates. I'll have to say the preparation that these guys put in, and the passion and the commitment that they showed was absolutely excellent. But I think, Kevin, I'd like to congratulate him on behalf of the board. I think he's an excellent appointment. I think it's exciting times for Mayo GAA. And I think, let's push forward now, and let's go have a good club championship, and hopefully, the club championship will unearth, 4 or 5 new players that we can bring into the squad. There's a good baseline there at the moment between youth and experience, and let's build on it. As I said, James Horan did great things for Mayo GAA, and I think, we're in a good place.
Ronan, the thing that jumps out there to me is the fact that the management teams were being assessed as opposed to who was at the front of the management teams. I know, like in Mayo's case, there were some very impressive teams that were put together that potentially could have taken over from James Horan.
Yeah, like whatever about the pop idol paradigm that they've used to get to this stage, they've landed on a very good management team. There's no two ways about it, and they could have gone any really of those avenues, and you'd have to look at it and be impressed. But some echoes with the Colin O'Rourke situation in Meath, whereby I think Kevin McStay was on with Joe about 18 months ago, a very interesting interview, but essentially was laying out his history in this regard, and the fact that he's shown interest in the job both formally and informally previously, and it hadn't come to pass, and he possibly thought that ship had sailed, but it's now he's heading up the regime, as you said, and it's not a solo mission. He's got huge wherewithal personally, but also like what experience and expertise to be able to fall back on. So Mayo just have to find a way to tally. I was at the Kerry Mayo game, which saw them exit the championship, and there was a sense of end of an era stuff, and I know people have floated that idea around this team a few times and they've proved people wrong plentyfold, but there is a sense there will be a regeneration period here in the next year or two, and that's why the tenure or the terms of this arrangement are significant, that they're giving him a few years to bed in new players where necessary and complete that transition. So if I was a Mayo fan, I'd be excited by this one.
3+1. Richie, Wesley Fofana, he didn't want to play at the weekend for Leicester, along with Tielemans was watching from the stands, and Chelsea appear to be making their belated official move for him now.
They have, yeah. Leicester have rejected a third bid from Chelsea for defender Wesley Fofana. The latest bid is believed to total €83 million. That is including add-ons. Leicester are due to play Chelsea at Stamford Bridge on Saturday, and Fofana is believed to be keen on that move. The defender not involved again for Leicester's Carabao Cup second round tie tonight. That is away to Stockport County, but former Bows man Paddy Madden is on the bench for County tonight.
Ron, it's hard to see this end well, where Tielemans and Fofana don't want to play for Leicester right now. And obviously they sat out the game at the weekend. And Fofana's case particularly, I think it's been pointed out, he was a Chelsea fan when he was a kid and he wants the move to happen. Conveniently, that often happens when someone's in the middle of a transfer saga. And at the moment, where you're talking about like £70+ million as a base fee here, it'll surely get to a point where they'll agree one. Yeah,
and Leicester, not the most glamorous side of this news story, particularly with Chelsea involved and the amount of cash they're splashing, but their summer activity or lack thereof at the King Power Stadium's bizarre, isn't it? Like,
they've had financial fair play trouble, so they had to get some people off the books. Their hope was that if they sold one or two, they'd be able to keep everyone else. But the problem now is for Brendan Rodgers that you dig your feet in early in the window and you say, we're not selling Fofana under any circumstances, and then Tielemans gets his head turned and possibly wants to go to Arsenal, and now they may well lose one or both with no time to replace them.
That's it. Like, this has been flagged for months at this stage, and in the last couple of weeks, I know they've amended it in the last little while, but they were the only team in the top 5 leagues in Europe that hadn't signed anybody. And Kasper Schmeichel, granted in the final chapter of his career, was gone without much fanfare, and you're thinking, like, what is...
Still an important player when they hadn't brought in a first choice goalkeeper for him either.
For sure. Yeah, so like the Leicester thing is fascinating, but then on the Chelsea side, as I said, Todd Bowley playing football manager here and signing all the up-and-coming players, and I felt sorry for Koulibaly at the weekend. I don't think this is necessarily what he bargained for, finding himself in the left-back position against a high-pressing Leeds team in that Chelsea back three. So, I don't know, there's some rhyme or reason to what they're doing, but the Fofana one would at least, in theory, free up Reece James to play in his actual position there at right wing back, and the knock-on effect of the Fofana deal to that end might be valuable. But what they do elsewhere with the Aubameyang thing, it's Chelsea are in a little bit of flux as well, and Tuchel's temperament is echoing that a little bit as well.
Yeah, and Tuchel at the weekend particularly insistent they need a number 9 going into the season, especially now Timo Werner and Lukaku have left. They're not going to rely on Kai Havertz to be their key attacker. Seamus Coleman was on the show with you last week. Richie's back in the field tonight.
He is, yeah. He makes his first Everton start since May tonight. The Republic of Ireland captain has been named in the Everton starting 11, wrong code, for their Carabao Cup tie away to Fleetwood Town. Anthony Gordon is named on the bench amid reports he's told the club he wants to leave, also for Chelsea, funnily enough. Recent signing from Bohemians, Promise Omashare, is on the Fleetwood bench tonight. Elsewhere this evening, Aston Villa are away to Bolton. Southampton travel to Cambridge United. Brentford are away to Colchester. Fulham are at Crawley Town. Nottingham Forest make the trip to Grimsby. Bournemouth have a tricky trip to Norwich, for whom Adam Ida could make a first appearance since May. He's been named on the bench for the Canaries tonight. Crystal Palace go to Oxford, for whom ex-Sligo goalkeeper Ed McGuinty starts. Wolves and Nathan Collins at the heart of their defence entertain Preston, and Greg Cunningham starts for Preston with Alan Brown and Troy Parrott on the bench. Elsewhere, Georgie Kelly starts for Rotherham against Morecambe, with Chidozie Ogbeni and JJ Coyote on the bench for them. Lots of Irish involvement as well at Pride Park, where David McGoldrick starts, as does Jason Knight for Derby County. They're at home to West Brom with Callum Robinson and Dara O'Shea both starting for them. So it's going to be a busy night for Irish players across the water. Yeah,
Brian and Kildare on contact on 53106. How long till Brendan Rodgers is back up in Scotland? Chancer is what Brian thinks of Brendan Rodgers, who's had a hard time with players looking to leave the club at the King Power this summer. They will be keeping Jamie Vardy though for 3 more years. I think he's going to be 38 when that when that contract finishes up.
Legal bills need paying, Will.
There you go. Yeah, it's an expensive time for Jamie Vardy this summer has been. Away from Wagatha Christie then, we had the Velta today, and how did Sam Bennett get on?
Bit of ups, bit of downs for Sam Bennett today. Primoz Roglic won the 4th stage of the Vuelta a España, claiming the overall leader's red jersey in the process. He pipped Mads Pedersen to the line at LaGuardia. Sam Bennett picked up 10 more points by crossing the line 5th at today's intermediate sprint, but Pedersen has closed the gap on Bennett in the race for the green jersey to just 9 points with that second place finish today.
Yeah, we're arguing about some of the management teams that still have to be filled here. Limerick are going to have to find a new football manager. Billy Lee has stepped down, and Offaly potentially are closing in on finding their hurling management team.
Yeah, Billy Lee surprising many by stepping down as the Limerick football manager today. He had been in charge for the past 6 years, and arguably this last year was the most successful. Limerick reached the Munster final, of course, and they were promoted to Division 2 of the Alliance Football League, while Johnny Kelly has emerged as the front runner for the Offaly hurling job. As you mentioned, the county board opted against extending Michael Fennelly's tenure earlier this summer. Former Tipperary manager Liam Sheedy had been touted as a potential replacement, but subsequently poured cold water on those links. Kelly worked under Fennelly with Offaly and has guided sides to county titles in Offaly, Tipperary, and indeed his native Galway, namely Portumna. What's the word on this one, Will?
I think this is the way that they're going to go. I think the feelings seem to be on the ground once the initial stories were coming out about, like, Liam Sheedy was pretty much put to the forefront of this idea, particularly when the first reports came out in the Mirror that it would be Eamon O'Shea possibly as the front man with Liam Sheedy there in the background. But yet all the feeling locally was that Johnny Kelly has still been in conversations with the county board, despite the fact that Michael Fennelly left, that Johnny Kelly would be potentially staying on. I think the latest was that Johnny Kelly would be very much to the forefront, potentially with O'Shea involved as a hurling coach possibly. And if Liam Sheedy's to have any involvement, it would be a lot closer to his role with Monaghan, where he was more of a consultant rather than being a hands-on coach. So either way, it's still a very high-profile management team for a team who will be in the second flight in both league and championship for next year. But I was never quite totally convinced when we heard the rumours first about it being O'Shea and Sheedy together as the management team. And like Offaly have just been plagued with rumours over the last month between Davy Fitzgerald and whatever else around Michael Fennelly. But we shall see when we see, I think, is the feeling on the ground at the moment.
Must be a lot of decently sized expenses for him in that county. Well,
again, that's the thing, and that's why I never really believed some of the management teams that were being linked with it, that Offaly have to cut their own cloth. As much as they've had finance coming in from new sponsorship deals and, you know, Shane Lowry supporting bursaries and so on, I don't think they were ever likely to go in heavy on management teams, even if supporters are dreaming of that idea. I think they'll cut their cloth for Division 2 hurling and Division 2 Championship hurling for next year. From one potential appointment in Offaly to a man we just mentioned in Shane Lowry, to finish off, Rich, he's not going. There's no Team 30 for the Hoylake this weekend. Unfortunately for him, or for Eastlake even, he's not going along to the FedEx final round of the playoffs.
Yeah, I don't know if he's currently picketing outside the offices of the PGA Tour, but Will Zalatoris has been forced to pull out of this week's Tour Championship. The world number 9 has not won but 2 herniated discs. However, Lowry won't be replacing Zalatoris, and just 29 players will compete at the Tour Championship at Eastlake. Lowry finished just 1 place outside the top 30 in the FedEx Cup rankings, but he won't be playing it this weekend.
It was a miserable finish for him at the weekend. Bogey on 17, put him back, and then it looked like Adam Scott might miss out, but then Adam Scott managed to clean up on the 18th, and he misses out by 1 place. And now one of those players of the 29 is going to have no playing partner for the first 2 rounds, but Larry will not be getting the lucky invitation to come in as number 30. Ronan, thanks a million for joining us. Richie as well for joining us on the Newsround.
Cheers, lads.
Your chance to win big. News Talk Summer Cash Machine.
Yeah, the Summer Cash Machine continues here, and we have given away already more than €1.8 million this year. Clodagh McQuaid in